Hello and thank you for joining me. Today I have the pleasure in being able to interview a man who served for 27 years in the US Army. He had 2 tours in Vietnam, was the recipient of 17 air medals and the Legion of Merit and 2 Bronze Stars. He retired a full colonel. He's a father of 3, a grandfather of 8 and a great-grandfather of 2. And his name is John Ernest Kempster, but to everybody else, he's known as Jack. And he's with me now from Florida. Good morning, Jack. How are you?
I'm actually, considering that I'm 85 years old, I'm doing pretty well.
Well, that's just stolen my first line, because I was going to say something like, oh, you were born in Highland Hospital, Rochester, New York, on the 16th of November, 1940. And as this is December 2025, you've just celebrated an 85th birthday. Congratulations, you've stole my thunder there. This is off to a great start. I'm only
Sorry,
kidding.
Craig.
I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. I've got so much stuff here to get through. Okay, so November 1940 to Ernest, let me get this right, Brazel Kempster, yeah?
That is correct. Ernest Brazel Kempster Jr.
Junior.
Yes.
Okay.
And Lila
Marie?
and my Lila House Kempster.
Right, Lila. Okay.
Right.
Okay. And your father, let's just quickly, because there was no immediate, well, obviously come onto the military much later, but you're not from a traditional military family, are you? Like father, son. He was a plant engineer?
Yes, a plant engineer,
Rochester?
taking care of the physical plant of the Rochester Products Division of General Motors, and for most of his career, and in later years, for between 5 and 10 years, in the last part of his career before he passed, he was working for the Graflex camera companies. If you're aware of Graflex cameras, those are the big box cameras that reporters you see in the old 1940s, 50 movies, the square box reporters cameras. That's what Graflex made. And he was also the plant engineer for them. And
so, no military connection there?
No.
Not at all. But he was clearly a very talented man, because he's built 2 houses, hasn't he, back in the 50s, which I can see here in the notes, at Arlington Drive and 27 Tuxford Road.
Right.
Of which only one you lived at, because you joined the army.
That is correct.
For the other one, but there's a funny story in there, because this wasn't America. I mean, from an English perspective, we often think of like 50s America as being, they had things we didn't have, much nicer cars and refrigerators and all this kind of thing. And I appreciate this is early 50s. Yeah. But there is a story about a latrine, isn't there? I mean, things started off pretty basic, shall we say?
Yes.
Right, okay.
I would be more than happy to elaborate.
Yeah, go on.
Actually, it was neither of the 2 houses that you talked about on either Arlington Drive or Tuxford. This was a summer cottage that my parents had at a small lake, a freshwater lake, in about an hour south of where we lived. And it was up by the hillside. And my father built the house, or the summer cottage, if you will. We lugged everything up on our backs, to include the cinder blocks that went under the foundation, the boards that made up the siding and the flooring and the windows, all because it was on a hillside. And so we could only get the car so far up, and then we had to lug the stuff up. So one of the, of course, obviously, that was to build the cottage. Well, since we would spend weekends there, we had to have some place for relief, physical relief of our bodily functions. And so my dad, he built actually a very nice outhouse, I'm not sure what you call them in the UK, but he built an outhouse that was actually, it started out as a one-holer, and and after about 5 years or so, he decided that we needed to upgrade it a little bit, so he decided he would build a two-holer. So he expanded, doubled the size of it, and it was far enough away from the house that we would it was within 30 seconds or so, or a minute walk, but it was not right next to the house. It was over in the woods a bit, and he actually designed and built and dug the appropriate holes for this outhouse. It had no water. It was just a place to, as we say, to take the Sears Roebuck catalog and read it while you're while you were enjoying sitting down.
Right. Okay. So I also see in the notes here, kindly provided by your son Ted.
Yes.
You attended Lincoln Avenue Elementary School.
Yes.
Which I think we would call that primary school, first school that you go to.
Primary, yes.
Yeah, and it says here, entering 6th grade, Mrs. Howard thought boys were evil and kept the room stiflingly hot. What exactly is that all about, Jack?
But not only did she keep the room very, very hot, of course, again, in upstate New York, in wintertime, it does get cold. So she decided that, we're going to keep this room nice and warm so nobody gets cold. Well, she kind of overdid it. And besides that, she had geranium plants all along the windowsills that kind of grew like topsy. And I must admit that for years, the smell of a geranium just absolutely was it was kind of like poison to me because of the situation that we were in. We as the young males in the class, she did not consider us to be part of the human race apparently, and and we were evil little boys. And so in 6th grade, so I guess I was probably 10, 11 years old. But I survived, and I'm probably a stronger person for it because I learned, all right, Jack, just keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, and soldier on.
Well, it's funny you should mention surviving and soldiering on and being 10 years old because there was a little incident with a meat grinder, wasn't there? When you were 10 years old, and that wasn't quite so funny.
No. My mother was making corned beef hash, and as we were using she had an electric meat grinder, and I was helping her to put the meat and the potatoes and the other things that go into a corned beef hash meal into the grinder. Well, as it was going down, some of the stuff was sticking into the opening of it. So instead of using the wooden plunger that came with the grinder, I started poking with my fingers to push it on down. Well, the corkscrew of the grinder grabbed a hold of my fingers that were down in the hole, and to the net result was, as you can see on the video, was a partial loss of a finger, which was interesting in that though it was traumatic at the time, when I was in college in ROTC and getting ready to go into the Army, they said, well, no, that's going to be that's going to be a disqualifying feature. So I had to take a series of tests, strength tests, mobility, sit in front of it. Here I am. I'm a 16, 17-year-old kid sitting in front of a board of officers, explaining to them why I should not be 4F, which is completely out of military service, and I should be combat arms certified. And I guess my gift of gab kind of came out at that time, because after the interviews and all of the tests, the strength tests, the photographs, the measuring of my hands, etc., they agreed and said, combat arms approved. So I could I could go into the Army and also go into aviation, because you had to be a certain level of fitness in order to be, because at that time and even to today, to be in the Army aviation requires it's a volunteer force. It's all volunteer, always has been, always will be, and so therefore I had to volunteer for service. I had to pass certain physical standards, and that was one of the gates I had to go through, and I got through it successfully.
Yeah, well, I was going to come on to that, and you've preempted me again, which is great. I love this, because you're leading the interview. This isn't an interview, this is a chat on the terrace. It's fantastic. So, okay, I'll just go back a little bit. So I've got you here now entering a junior high school in 52. You get your first car in 56. You're 16, so we're talking about the time that you were you managed to convince the Army that you were fit enough, because you were. And it says down here that your first car was a Beetle.
Yes.
And your brother is mentioned here for the first time. Now, we'll just touch on him briefly, because I've already said you're not from a big military family, but your brother, he did go into the military, and he was a little bit older than you, wasn't he?
Yes, he was 3 years older than I was, and when he graduated from college, Cornell University, just like I graduated, he graduated about 2 to 3 years ahead of me, and he went into the Air Force, and he wanted to fly, jets and fast movers and those sorts of things. Whereas when I came to the end of my college career in ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps program, I was accepted in the Army and also accepted into Army Aviation. I was glad of that, because I did not want to fly fast movers, jets. I wanted to fly, as we say, low, slow, and reliable. So
right,
that to me was good, because as a youngster, where we lived at 7 Arlington Drive, we were underneath the approach for a small grass airstrip that was just down the street from us. And I would watch these very small, like Piper Cubs and those sorts of things, J3 Cubs, every day landing and taking off from that little grass strip. And I was intrigued and quite enamored by the idea of A, of flying, and B, flying in a small, light airplane. Because when you're in that, they're mostly two-seaters, which meant that there wasn't a whole crowd of people to help you. You had to be your own man. You had to be your own, on your own, taking charge, and that appealed to me.
That leads me on, really. I mean, you've graduated from Pittsford High School.
Yes.
In 58. When did you first approach the military then?
Actually, at that time, the first 2 years of your college, it was mandatory for all males to participate in this ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. So when I went to university, my first 2 years were mandatory, and we had Army, Navy, and Air Force Reserve training groups as part of the university, and I chose. I did not want to compete with my brother, who was in the Air Force ROTC at that time, going to the same university he did. So what I did was I said, well, I'll take the Army because, first of all, we don't have the Army didn't have jets. They had these nice small light aircraft, and so I thought, well, that's kind of what I like to do because I've seen them my whole life, and been enthused about aviation as a youngster. So that's why I chose the Army, and at the end of the first 2 years, that was called basic ROTC, and then you could opt as a volunteer for your third and fourth year of university to go into what they called advanced ROTC. That meant you were on a track to, when you graduated, you would be commissioned as an officer in your particular branch of the service.
Okay, and presumably they paid your college fees if you did the third and fourth year. Is that how that worked, or
not a dime?
Not a dime. Okay, so the thing is that at 16 you had to be approved for suitability medically for the military, but once you'd been approved when you were 18 and you went to college, you did the 2 years mandatory. Presumably, if you hadn't been approved, that would have been a massive turning point, and the mandatory ROTC, the ROTC, you wouldn't have had to have done it. Is that how that would have worked?
That's how that would have worked, yes.
Yeah, because you would never have been suitable, so they'd have already said no way. So,
yep.
That was a big gig. 62.
Yes.
You've now graduated from Cornell University with a Bachelor of Science in, of all things, for a guy that goes off and has a career in the US Army, botany.
Yes, essentially.
I mean, it's a bit left to centre, isn't it? Because I thought maybe you would have studied to have been an engineer or something like that, like your father, just in case something didn't work out with the military or as a backup. But botany, and to then join the US Army.
Well, I will admit that the reason I did that was because my brother went through the engineering school there. Very expensive. Back in those days, expensive. Nowadays we could say, wow, that was pretty cheap. But back in those days, my parents were paying for his in what was called the endowed college at that time. So what I said was that, we have the New York State had a state school of agriculture, and the tuition was pennies on the dollar compared to the endowed college at Cornell. And so what I said was that, and I had a summer job working for a landscaping company. So it was kind of fell into it naturally in that sense. But what really was my driving force was the university required those of us in the state school, we had to take 51% or more of our credit hours in the state school, but 49% or less of our credit hours could be taken in the endowed college. So, for a very, very modest tuition, I was able to take my required hours to get my degree in the state school, whereas I also had the opportunity to take courses such as philosophy and psychology and English literature and etc., so that I was getting a well-rounded education from the endowed college at the same time that I was getting my degree in the state school in botany.
Right. Okay. Well, I have no doubt that psychology would probably have stood you in very good stead for what came later, but we'll come on to that. So, having graduated from Cornell, when did you get your first, when did you first get into the cockpit of an aircraft and fly? Because by that stage, it's what, let's get a time frame on this now. We're 62, aren't we? So 1962, so you're 22 years old. That would be quite late to start training as a pilot. So presumably when you had been at university as part of the lectures and all the leaderships courses and all the other sort of things, the input they gave you, they threw you at an aircraft. Can you remember? Well, of course you'll remember, but you know, tell me about the first time you get into an aeroplane and somebody says, right, sonny boy, I'm going to teach you to fly.
Right. Actually, as a perk, if you will, of the advanced ROTC program in my third and fourth year of university, they offered an aviation class for those of us in the advanced ROTC. And I said, oh, that sounds pretty cool. I think I'll do that. And so by actually my first experience in aircraft were while I was a college student, because of this side program that was available through the ROTC, and it was the ROTC flight program, I think is what they called it. Maybe some moniker like that, and I will digress for just a second when you talk about your first time in the aircraft, because of course, obviously, you have to have some dual time with an instructor pilot.
Of course.
And we were flying little J3 Cubs. That's a two-seater tandem. And as a student, I would sit in the back seat. My instructor would sit in the front seat. He was a former football player. So my view of the world...
Was he a big guy? Because I always think of American football players as being big guys, and I don't necessarily think of being pilots as big guys, but yeah, I've got my own reasons for that. He
certainly filled up the cockpit, I'll tell you that. He was a big guy. So my view of the world was spent looking side to side around him to get the perspective. So after we flew a few hours, about 4 or 5 hours of dual time, he said, okay, you're ready to solo.
Wow.
So, you know, he was like 200 and some odd pounds. He was probably 250 pounds. So when he got out of the aircraft, he said, you take it around the pattern 3 times, and you know, and when you finish, come on back and we'll talk. So he gets out, closes the door, and I taxi on out, ready to take off. And I was used to when there was the 2 of us in there. You had to full power in order to take off. It was a fairly short airstrip, and even though it was a light aircraft and it could land on a very short airstrip, it was still pretty struggling to get airborne. Well, when his 250 pounds out of the cockpit, that aircraft I had sort of forgotten about. Weight and lift and drag and the aerodynamics of flying a plane, that when you take that amount of weight out of an aircraft, it flies a lot different. So I added the power fairly robustly, and literally the plane leaped off the ground because it was so light without him in there. And so I'm going like, I was like, I'm glad there was no cameras on board that plane, because I'm sure I would have looked like a deer in the headlights, because it was so startling, the change in performance when he was out of there. So I didn't crash on takeoff, but it was a wobbly takeoff, I must admit. Around the pattern and 3 times, and after the first go round, I was okay, and they were. They were pretty decent landings, I must say. And when I got back, he said, "You did fine." Kind of an interesting. And he said, "Yes, you did fine. interesting takeoff on your first loop around the pattern. And I said, yeah, it kind of surprised me too. And so to this day, I still remember, my God, this is a big airplane. You know, and it's just, well, if you're familiar with the J3 Cub or a little, it's a tiny, tiny aircraft. But to me, it was like flying a 707 because it was so much. When he got out, and I said, oh. This is what I see. I can see everything, the runway and everything that was my surroundings were not obstructed by him. So and he went on to be he was a wonderful instructor. Taught me how to fly and how to do the aerobatics and upper air work and everything. So that when I graduated, I essentially was a private pilot.
So Jack, tell us, when did you commence basic training? Where did you do that, and how long was that for?
Well, actually, the basics of the Army life, the Army training, the how to handle a rifle and how to march and things like that, were all done in the ROTC in the university.
Right.
And in fact, that's basically is the extent of to kind of learn the basics of Army life, learn how to march, you know, which is your left foot, which is your right foot, and how to do those things was the curricula for the 4 years that I was at university. And when I graduation for the transportation officer basic course you would call it advanced training, if you will, in your specialty, which was being a transportation corps officer. Because the Transportation Corps had the boats, the trains, the planes, and the vehicles of the Army. So therefore, anything that transported things and people was controlled by and maintained by the Transportation Corps. So that's what I learned in the Transportation Officer Basic course.
Got it. So you didn't go to a traditional boot camp, as people think of a boot camp. You'd got all what we would call the square bashing, marching around and how to present arms, and you'd done all that when you were still in university.
Yes.
So you come out of university and you are presumably at that point you're an officer cadet. You are not yet commissioned until you have done your transportation course, or had you already received a commission when you came out of university?
The way the American services do it, when you graduate from university, you are made a second lieutenant in your branch.
Got it.
So I was already a commissioned officer, but the closest thing that I got to a boot camp was in my senior year in college. There was a 2-week training session in primitive conditions, and as well as being required to keep a barracks clean, so that we would, even though we were going to be officers, we had to know what our non-commissioned and enlisted personnel would be facing in their careers. So therefore, one of the things that was a part and parcel of your training to become an officer was to understand the jobs, the things, the crises that a young soldier would be facing in his time in the service. So therefore, we were taught, everything from, you've probably heard stories of, cleaning the barracks floor with a toothbrush. Did that.
Yeah.
Did that.
Yeah. Undoing the brass screws from the solid oak floor and brassoing them and then putting them back again. I vaguely remember something like that from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Transportation basic officer course then, briefly. Okay, so you're commissioned, you're an officer. What sort of stuff do you do on that? Because it's a 2-month course.
Yes.
So it's going to be pretty quick. Well, it's 2 months, but it's going to be pretty fast moving, I meant by that.
Yes, it was structured so that we would understand the organizational structure of various kinds of units that transported things, a truck company that would be transporting goods and services and troops from point A to point B. We were taught how that was organized, the rank structure, the requirements, the responsibilities of the people who were doing that work. Same way with the Army. Most people think the Army didn't have. The Army is a bunch of guys, and yes, we have trucks, okay, but we also had boats. I didn't know anything about boats, but so the Army taught me about boats.
So that course was like a general overview,
yes,
of the tasks that were carried out by transportation.
Yes.
And so you're coming out with a sound knowledge. Now, presumably during that time, you're flying. You're keeping your hours up. Are you on the cub? I mean, what are you doing at this point?
No flight hours at all. It was strictly a ground operation, learning classroom work as well as field work for the various specialties. But I was not flying at that time. I did not start flying.
Not even at weekends?
Not even on weekends. Nope.
Okay. But that changes, doesn't it? Because we now get to Fort Rucker.
Yes.
Come on then, tell me about that one. Your course that was, well, OFWAC 63-5.
Yeah.
So what does that stand for then?
Officer Fixed Wing Aviator Course 63-5. It was in fiscal year 63. We were the 5th class going through, and that's where I learned to fly. That was where, even though I already was a private pilot, the military taught me to fly like a military pilot. So the fact that I was already understood the aerodynamics of an aircraft, they sat me down and taught me like I didn't know squat about anything from day one. Okay, we're going to teach you about the aerodynamics of flight and blah blah, etc. So that's what the Army considered to be a blank sheet of paper, and so therefore I had to be trained in the Army way of flying, and they taught me.
Which is classic Army, really, isn't it? In other words, you've come through the door, you've done your transportation course, you've received a commission, and you're a private pilot already. Now sit down there, son, because you don't know shit, and you're going to learn our way, right? And the learning starts right here, right now. So whatever you think you are, you're not.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're nothing.
There's the right way, there's the wrong way, and then there's the Army way.
And on the list of fixed wing aircraft here, I've got the L-19. Now, that's a military designation.
Yes.
Bird dog.
Yes. Essentially, it's a high
go
wing. It's like a Cessna 172. It's a tail dragger, single engine, and designed for observation work, which is why they bought a high wing aircraft, because you could look out and you had very good visibility underneath the aircraft. And it was designed as basically the Army bought it for the artillery, for the artillery forward observers to be adjusting the artillery fire from the air. It was a 6-cylinder gasoline engine, not fuel injected. It was carbureted, and it was essentially what Cessna put in their airplanes. This airplane was made by the Cessna Aircraft Company, and it was even when you see Cessnas flying around today, whether it's in the UK or the US, they all look very similar to that old L-19 bird dog, because they, 2 main gear in the front, a tail wheel in the back, and it's what we call that a tail dragger.
Something else that has got absolutely nothing to do with flying happened around this time. Do you want to tell me what happened by the swimming pool at some point? Did you meet somebody at the swimming pool around about this time?
It was summertime, and at the officers' club we had our own swimming pool at the officers' club, and on a weekend we were all bachelors, second lieutenants. And we would congregate at the officers' club to perhaps have a pint or two, and and then we would be sitting around the pool. Again, as good bachelors that we were admiring the landscape.
Of course, admiring the landscape. I like what you did there. Keep going. This is great. It's gold, pure gold. Keep going.
So I was, as I say, I was sipping on a pint. And this beautiful young lady walked past and was like, "Oh my goodness sake alive! Look what I just saw!" And I nudged one of my buddies. I said, "Who's that? You know her?" And then, "No, I don't know who she is." So collectively, there was 3 or 4 of us sitting at the table, but they didn't know him. So I got up off of my duff. And where she had come in the pool and walked past us, and she had sat down. So I went up and I introduced myself and, "Hi, how are you? Can he buy you a drink or anything like that?" And she said, "Oh no, thank you. Okay, fine." And so at that point, we struck up a conversation. As I say, I introduced myself. I learned what her name was and where she lived. And
at which point I should probably mention that her name was B. Campbell, wasn't it?
Yes, but B. Campbell, which I did not know at the moment, but she was the daughter of the Colonel Raymond P. Campbell Jr., who was the director of instruction. He was one of the, in fact, he worked for the commanding general of the post as the basically responsible for all of the instruction that was being provided to both beginning pilots as well as advanced pilots. So I thought, oh, okay, and so I said, well, mind if I, if we stop by, or if I see you again? And she said, oh yes, that would be fine. And so the next day, I came by the house, and her house, and rang the doorbell, and her mother, Betty Campbell, came to the door and said, yes. I said, is B there? I'm Jack. Is B there? And she said, just a moment. And so she called down the hallway away from the front door and said, B, Jack's here. And floating back from down the hallway, enough for me to hear, was, Jack who? I was thinking to myself at that moment, boy, I really made an impression, didn't I? Way to go, Jack. Well, it turns out that a very good friend of hers, by the name of Jack Woodard, she would also knew him and was sort of casually dating him, I guess. So her mother asked me, Jack, who? And I said, Jack Kempster. She said, Ellis. And so she, again, her mother turns and calls down the hallway, oh, it's Jack Kempster. And of course, I didn't know at the time, because she told me later on, there was a lot of scrambling to get her hair fixed up and everything so she could come out and say hi, because she said, I was not ready for prime time right then. But if it had been Jack Woodard, she would have come out. But it was because of Jack Kempster. Well, I'm going to get myself, dressed up and in good shape, cosmetically, etc. So that was of course, I never knew any of this until many years later when she told me what had transpired that day with the Jack Who. So it's kind of funny because some of my friends that even now that are in their 60s and 70s and 80s refer to me as, Oh, Jack who?
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned something else there, that Colonel Raymond Potter Campbell Jr., he'll figure a little bit later on.
Yes.
But we had to introduce B at that point. So we 63, second lieutenant base pay, $222.30 a month gross, and flight pay was $110 a month. Was that additional to the second lieutenant pay?
Oh.
So, okay.
Yes.
So that was a lot of, that's like, if you'd have been a second lieutenant in an administration role, that would have been your pay, but the flight pay was 50% of your pay on top.
Exactly.
Quite a lot of money. Well, a lot of money, you know. A percentage is a percentage. Now we're getting on to, well, it's not combat at this point, but you are leaving the United States. Before we get on to that, shall we take a short break and then we can do bathroom breaks or whatever you want to do?
All right. I think I would like to do a quick break. Thank you very much.